Hello everybody, my name is Araceli. This is my final presentation for CIT 260, Spring Semester 2018, Professor Craig Jones, Team Far West. Starting off, I would like to discuss what is the difference between a static class variable versus a non-static or instance variable. A static class variable is associated with a class, not the object of that class. It is declared with the keyword static, and it makes only one copy of each variable per class. It is stored in the static memory created when the program starts and destroyed when the program stops. It is accessed by calling the class name.variableName, and when it is altered, it is changed for all object instances. In the case of non-static variables, also known as instance variables, the memory is created when a class object is created. They can be accessed with object reference, but they cannot be in a static method or called by it. They are used when you'll use a method to create multiple copies. They are specific to an object. They are accessed by calling object_reference.variableName, and if altered, it will only change for the class object instance in which it is defined. Now, how to reference and call a static function versus a non-static function or method. A static method belongs to a class. It is useful when you only have one instance where you will use a method. It can be called on the class and also on the object of the class, but it can only access and modify static members. A non-static function belongs to an object of a class. It is useful when you need to create multiple copies of the method, and they can be accessed both by static and non-static members. They can also be modified by static. They can also modify static variables. I will now show you an example of a static method used in our code. In this case, we created a static method inside the location view class called moveLocation. So we don't need to create an object to call them every time the player moves to a new location. As you can see right here, it is using the rule we declared at the beginning of how to call a static variable by calling the class name and then the method, the static method, locationControl.moveLocation. In this case, it's doing this because we don't need the values from the object variables. You don't need to create a new method every time the player is going to move to a new location. So we will just be calling the same one every time our player needs to move. Next, I will be showing you an example of a non-static method in our code. In this case, in Items menu view, we created a new object down here. And this is why this is a non-static method. We are creating a new object inside the method, and then we are calling it down here. Well, we are actually calling one of the methods inside its parent class view called display. In this case, we will be inheriting from the view class to display the new object that is being created in the menu choice method. Next, when to use an array list, or an enum. An array is a collection of variables of the same type referred to by a common name. They can have one or more dimensions, and it'll group together related variables. They are implemented as objects, and they are referenced by an index number. The length of the list is constant and will never change. This is particularly a characteristic set for arrays. This is an example of an array in our code. Because an array has a fixed length, that's exactly the structure it'll have. In this case, we also mentioned that our characteristic of an array can only hold is that it can only hold the same type of objects inside. In this case, we created an array called location, and we only have locations inside of this array. Only one type of object, and it is a fixed length. The length of this array can never change because it has been predefined. Next, we have an array list. The difference between an array and an array list is that the length of an array list can grow or shrink. In this case, inside our item control class, we created an array list for find items that will allow our player to pick as many items as they want and add them onto the list. The list will be able to continue growing as the player finds the items. Lastly, we have an enum. An enum has predefined values in the game. These cannot be touched, they cannot be changed, they will always be the same. In this case, inside our actor type class, we created an enum called actor type. This one has the characteristics of each actor, in this case Joe, Cora, Billy, Jane, and Steven, and their values, the predefined values of this enum they are found inside the parentheses. How to use a basic statement and index to access elements stored in an array or an array list. In this case, we are using an array. We are accessing an array for the locations. In this line right here, we can find how to actually call the array list. What we are doing here is we are retrieving the names of all the locations inside this function, print map. The array has all the names inside. We're going to go space by space to access each item in the location array. In order to access each item, we're going to use the square brackets, and inside the square brackets we're going to find the index inside it to actually call that object inside our array. Because our locations array is bidimensional, that's why we need the two square brackets with the two indexes in order to access that location inside our array. In order to access an array list, we will use the method get with the index inside our parentheses. As we can see in line 48, we use our method get list, and then inside our parentheses, we have the requested index. Now, how are we going to throw, propagate, and catch custom runtime errors in our program? A try-catch statement basically works so that every time we run our code, it'll check to try to find any errors. And if it does find any errors, it will let us know with a specific message, error message created inside another class. In this case, we have created inside our reports view, which prints our map into a file, we have created two try and catch statements. This first try catch statement, what it does, it'll try to run this code from locations, from calling the locations inside our location array, all the way to system.out.println, allowing the user to know that their file has been printed into the specific file name they requested, and that it has been created. In order to do this, we have our file writer, which will create the file name inserted by the user, and we have the buffered writer, which will keep the memory of what will be printed inside our file. In order to do this, we will be accessing the buffered writer. The buffered writer will be opening our location on our desktop or the desktop of the user in order to be able to print a file into the computer. So our try statement will try to run the code from here to here. If there are any type of errors, like the system couldn't find a location to actually print the file, or the file just couldn't be printed because there were errors on it, it'll let us know by catching the error and then telling us right here. Next, we have a finally statement. This finally method will let us know that regardless whether or not our file can or cannot be printed, it will always close our buffered writer. Because, remember, we are opening an access to our desktop, and we need to close it somehow. Otherwise, it'll just keep running in an infinite loop. So, the try statement right here is saying that regardless of whether or not the file has been printed, it'll catch it either way and close the access to the desktop so that it doesn't continue running in a loop. And that is how we will close this part right here, whether or not the file has been printed successfully. Now, when and why do we use a character stream versus a byte stream class to read and write data to a file? Firstly, what is a character stream and what is a byte stream? A character stream will read and write a text file. It'll read character by character. A byte stream will read and write a binary file. It'll actually read byte by byte. In our case, we use the character stream in order to print our map into a file. As you can see, file writer, file name, line 123, is a line where we are using a character stream in order to print our text, which is the locations, in order to print our text into a text file. Because it only contains text, that is why we are using a character stream. Lastly, how do we actually write a character data to an external file? Or how do we print a file? In order to print a file, we have created this method, print map. We are telling inside the parentheses, we are determining the parameters of the information that will be printed into our file, which in this case is the content and locations. It is our locations and the content inside our locations. Next, we determine the string file name variable. Get inputs. Inside this variable, we are asking the user to insert the file name or the name of the file in which they would like to print the map information. With get inputs, we will gather the information the user has inserted to create our text file. In this case, we are creating buffered writer, BW, and file writer. Buffered writer will be the one that will contain the memory of the content that we will be writing onto our file. This is the line that will be actually printing the information into our file. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for your time.